Okay, we're live.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Can everyone see the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Hilton, it is 6:30 according to my phone, and we are live. So whenever you want to start, we're ready to go.
Okay, so I'll start off by asking if we have any comment from members of the public.
Not at this time, Mr. Hilton.
Thank you. Then I'll turn this over to Nick to give us our report on the Herbine audit.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here and go through a PowerPoint presentation overview of the audit. My name is Nick Bieber. I'm the senior manager with Herbine and Company, who oversaw the audit of the school district for the 23-24 year. So I had met on Monday with a few members of management and board member and finance committee members to go through this presentation in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go through a little higher level tonight, but if there's any questions, feel free to stop me along the way. So a little bit of a background for the audit. It is conducted under 3 standards: generally accepted auditing standards, which is our general financial statement audit; under government auditing standards, also known as Yellow Book. So this is the additional testing of internal controls of the school district, as well as some general compliance requirements. Then lastly, under uniform guidance, which is the testing of the federal programs for compliance and internal controls as well. And our responsibilities as auditors is to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatements, whether due to fraud or error, and then render an opinion on whether those financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. So under those standards, we did have unmodified opinions issued under generally accepted auditing standards, as well as under uniform guidance. We had an unmodified opinion on compliance. So unmodified, it's the highest level of opinion that can be issued. So it's a clean opinion from an independent auditor. So this excerpt is a schedule from the financial statements, which gives a nice overall overview of the audit results. So on here, you'll see those unmodified opinions that were issued, and all the no's and none's reported indicated that we had no internal control findings that needed to be communicated both over financial statements and federal awards, as well as no non-compliance issues either. Under our federal programs testing, we did test 3 programs: the Gear Up program, the Special Education Cluster, and the Child Nutrition Cluster, all with no issues to be reported. So the last box that you see checked there is yes. That's actually a good yes in this situation. Does the auditee qualify as a low-risk auditee? So this indicates that the prior 2 years also did not have any material weakness finding that would increase the risk of the audit for the school district under uniform guidance. So moving into the numbers, looking at general fund revenue budget to actual results. Overall for the year, the district came in $8.4 million over budget for the revenues, which is a 10.6% variance. key components there under local revenue sources, the real estate taxes were just about $1 million over budget, primarily due to the actual collection rate exceeding what was the anticipated rate within the budget. Earnings on investments also almost $1 million over budget, just with the high interest earning rates during the year with the investments of the school district. And then moving on to the state sources, which was the biggest component here, $4.1 million over budget. Main components there were the basic education fund subsidy was $1.2 million over, and this is a timing difference with the school district's budget being passed before the state budget, so you don't know at that point in time what the funding level will be. The retirement subsidy came in $865,000 over budget. There was an increase in the PSERS reimbursement rate for the school district, which led to that increase, as well as the additional $2.5 million in Ready to Learn funding that was received. Under the federal sources, that was about $1.2 million over budget. Two main components there was the Gear Up grant funding, which wasn't budgeted for, that was $760,000, as well as Title I increases. So on the expenditure side, bottom line there, you'll see those came in $8.8 million over budget. Keep in mind, revenues were $8.4 million over, and big components there were unbudgeted revenue line items and new funding that came in during the year. So those related expenditures were not part of the original budget on the expense side. Some main components for the budget to actual variances. The special programs line that came in $1.6 million over, primarily to charter school tuition, as well as additional professional services from the Montgomery County IU. Another larger variances was on the student services side. That was primarily due to the additional spending on Lincoln Center with the Access and Gear Up professional services. The operations and maintenance of plant, that was $2.1 million over budget. Couple components there, the $350,000 in alarm system grants, which were spent within this function, as well as overall increases in professional and property services, which included the security officer costs, as well as the emergency HVAC costs within that function. Student transportation was $811,000 over, with the main component there being from a PDE. There was a subsidy deduction in relation to the Montgomery County IU transportation recovery from the COVID-19 lag. So that was $780,000. That was an unanticipated item for the 23-24 year that related to prior year services. And lastly, just the reminder that those expenditures that were over budget were primarily funded by the excess revenues. So putting everything all together, the revenues and expenditures, you'll see that the district had budgeted for a use of fund balance of $679,000. And then the actual result for the year was a use of $860,000. So looking at a $80 million budget, just a $180,000 variance net at the end of the day. So right in line with what was budgeted. So that brought the ending fund balance in the general fund to just over $25 million at the end of the year. So on this side, I just want to focus on that breakdown of the fund balance, the $25 million. Couple components there, non-spendable and restricted funds of $250,000 and $210,000. The non-spendable relates directly to the prepaid expenditures, and the restricted funds are the restricted from the Phoebe Semi Trust for the music programs. There's also committed funds of $3.1 million. That was reduced during the year from what was presented at the prior year end balance of $680,000, which was the budgeted deficit for the year. So that budgeted deficit was the intended use of those committed PSERS funds. And the only other change within the assigned fund categories from the prior year was an additional $75,000 that was assigned for charter school and special education tuition. So that brought the unassigned fund balance of $6,785,000. which is 8% of the budgeted expenditures for the subsequent, the 24-25 year, which is within the thresholds that are outlined in the district's fund balance policy, and the 8% is the maximum allowable unassigned there. This next slide just gives some trend information over the past 6 years here of the overall fund balance. The orange bar that you'll see there is what's within the general funds, and then the gray bar is the general fund plus the capital reserve funds that had been set aside. So outside of that 25 million, the district also has $2.4 million in capital reserves. So capital components within fund balance are that 2.4 million plus $9.5 million that have been assigned in the general fund for capital purposes. So that's a nice reserve to have, and overall the district is in a good overall financial position with these reserves in place, especially given if you enter into any construction contracts, those are going to be pretty significant dollars. So you have the reserves in place to fund those without taking out debt, or to limit the debt that's needed to fund those projects, as well as just the general environment with rising special education and charter school costs. You have reserves there for any years where those are well in excess of budget to be funded from those reserves. So moving on to the food service fund, showing the 2-year comparison here. What's presented in the financial statement is an increase in net position for the 23-24 year of $370,000. But looking at the adjusted net position, which represents pulling out the pension and other post-employment benefit adjustments. And the reason that we look at that, pulling that line item out, is because that's solely based on actuarial valuations for those two liabilities. So it has no cash flow impact to the district. So when you exclude that, that would have been an increase in net position of $286,000. So still a substantial increase, but a little less than the prior year's adjusted increase of $471,000. And the main component of that was just the general rising food and supply costs during the 23-24 year, as well as some pay increases and fewer unfilled positions within the food service. So once again, what's presented in the financial statements as far as the ending net position in the food service fund is a $248,000 net position. But when you pull out all the related deferred inflows and outflows and liabilities related to pension and other post-employment benefits, the district would be reporting a positive net position of $1,962,000. So part of that is invested in capital assets, but the remaining unrestricted net position represents about 7 months of operating expenses. So where the state threshold where they look for districts to be at is 3 months of operating expenses. So the district is in excess of that, and you saw from the prior slide that there were surpluses in the prior 2 years. So this is something to keep in mind, that you're looking to bring down those reserves within the food service fund to get towards the state recommendation of the 3 months. This allows for any capital purchases to be made directly out of the food service fund rather than be funded by the general fund, as well as that has the opportunity for you to offer the need for more competitive salaries if there's any issues filling positions, or as well as the ability to sustain the supply increase costs for supplies and food costs for the district. So lastly, within our communication letter, we did have a couple recommendations and reminders. So just a reminder within the self-insurance fund to keep reviewing those reserves. They represented about 9 months of reserves as far as the trends of operating expenses. So if the district would be in a situation where those reserves continue to increase, you do have the opportunity to take a holiday through CPAS, which would represent not paying into CPAS for a month in an effort to bring down those reserves. The food service claim form review comment, that's in relation to the testing that we had done. We looked at a sample of claim forms that were submitted And it was noted that the district's control is that there is an independent review after they're completed, but they were reviewed not in a timely manner. They were reviewed several months afterwards. So this is a reminder to make sure that that review is taking place timely at the time of the form preparation, and that's being reviewed before being submitted for reimbursement. Within the capitalization policy, that's just a recommendation to increase from $5,000 to $10,000 to align with the new federal funding program thresholds. And then we also had some information within that letter on some upcoming standards. The most significant is going to be impacting the district for the 24-25 fiscal year in relation to a new way to look at the liability calculated for compensated absences. So this isn't going to have an impact on the district's day-to-day reporting as far as the general fund operations, but will impact the financial statements when you're looking at the full accrual government-wide statements. And most likely it's going to be an increase to the liability that's reported there. Those were the main highlights that I wanted to go through today, but if there's any further comments or questions, I'll gladly take them.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised. I miss anybody? In that case, I thank you very much, Mr. Bieber, and for your presentation, and over and out.
All right, thank you all. Have a good night.
And now that brings us up to Mr. Chrisman.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody again.
Before you get started, I just have a question for Maureen, for both of you actually, but Maureen. We originally contracted with EI to do this facility study for $20,000. And has that now fully been used up?
Yes, I believe we've paid all of that in full.
Okay, so do we have an understanding that we're going to be paying them from like time and materials from this point forward, or are they stuck with a loss, or what's the situation there?
I think, Maureen, we still have $2,000 out that we haven't billed yet from the original study. And I think we're close to getting to the point where we can issue the feasibility study with the options, so that the board and the committee can kind of make a decision on how they like to proceed. So I think that's, if my memory serves me correctly, I think that's how we left it, unless something happened in the accounting world that I'm not aware of.
No, I think that's, yeah, the $2,000 that we left, that's the balance of the $20,000 contract.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chrisman, or not even giving you a chance to get started, but go ahead.
No, no worries whatsoever, Tom. Well, thank you. Good to see everyone again. We have a more of an executive summary presentation here. We should be able to get through it relatively quickly, and then kind of open it up for any questions moving forward here. So I want to start off just kind of as a quick recap of, the benefits of a feasibility study. And, as we discussed before, this is kind of our main process of focusing on facilities, demographics, your educational program. These aren't linear. They kind of weave in and out of each other, loop around back and forth, but ultimately we get to the end results, which is a complete evaluation. We itemize your options and deficiencies, get the total project cost, ROI, identifying priorities, and also looking into kind of different grant opportunities for your district. Feasibility study, again, is really about a proactive approach, identifying strategies that determine the most value for the district. The most successful districts don't just take our deficiencies and jump on them and just go one by one through there, because you don't get a lot of value out of that. You get things done, but there's not a lot of value that. So we try to look at the bigger picture, package those together, meeting the educational needs. If there's any, capacity or demographic needs, we also, bundle those in together and kind of move things forward. It also prepares for the district for future needs, and our document forms a working document that can be updated, whether it's monthly, yearly. They really act as a guiding light to get you from point A to point B. We tend to focus on looking 10 years out for, a lot of the different strategies that a district could use. And one of the most important things, though, and Bronson hit this home, is you never want to miss a day of education. If you can have some sort of certainty, reduce your surprises, it alleviates a lot of stressful decisions or angst moments. But that's the purpose of the feasibility studies, really to be proactive, forward thinking, and to attack things before they become a significant issue that will negatively impact your facility or your, God forbid, education. So as a recap, we were really kind of diving into, doing a lot of good work. We have a lot of good information here. The options we're looking at are these four currently, and it's really focused on the district administration office and Edgewood. Those are the two problem facilities right now in terms of the quantity of deficiencies. So it makes sense to attack those first and try to get them stabilized in whatever way, shape, or form, and then kind of go on to different buildings from there. But for the intents and purposes of this presentation, this is kind of where we're focused right now, with option number one being the status quo. And it's basically just going through the deficiency list and addressing ranks 1 and 2 deficiencies, both at the district administration and Edgewood. You also see in red here, and we'll get to this in a second, we started looking at solar and also geothermal, and we look at that from a value and a potential cost savings to the district. And we'll get a little bit into that here in subsequent slides. But option number 2, we actually have a 2A and a 2B. They're very similar. Both of them address rank 1 and 2 deficiencies at Edgewood, but it's to close the current district administration office and either move the functions to Edgewood or the high school. Again, this does not include any solar dynamic, but it does include geothermal at Edgewood only, because we'd have to upgrade the HVAC system there due to the age and some of the issues we found. So we did include that in our cost summary. You'll see here in a second. Option number 3, again, we looked at just more of a kind of foundational piece, is demolishing the current district administration office and building a new one at the same site. However, this does not address any deficiencies with any of the buildings or include solar. And then option number 4 is, for all intents and purposes, the same as 2A, moving the DOA to Edgewood, but it's also potentially expanding the program at Edgewood from a revenue generation perspective. So we started getting into the cost here. As you can see, we were looking at this many different ways. You can see the base cost versus the total project cost. The total construction cost, just as a refresher, is just pure construction. We typically put a multiplier on that because there's a lot of soft costs involved with that. Out of that, as you can see here, that $7.6 million, that's purely deficiencies. As you go on to 2A, it's suggested to put roughly a little bit over a 10,000 square foot addition on Edgewood. And out of that $9 million in construction cost, we're addressing $5.3 million in terms of deficiencies. Now you'll see the cost jump if we move it to the high school. That's because the high school has significantly more rank 1 and 2 deficiencies. So that's really the delta between option 2A, 2B. We thought it was important for everyone to see that. So we're comparing apples to apples. And then as you can see with option number 3, we're about $5.3 million in total construction cost. We're not addressing any deficiencies. So if you would like to address the deficiencies at Edgewood, you're probably adding about another $5.2 million, which puts this in the $11.7 million range, comparable to some of the other options here. Option number 4, again, is similar to option 2A. It's demolishing or, moving on from the district administration office and moving those functions over to Edgewood, but it's also increasing an additional 5,000 square feet. So naturally the cost would go up with that a little bit. So the total construction cost would be 10.7, with also addressing about $5.3 million worth of deficiencies ranks 1 and 2 with Edgewood. Here, if everybody can see this, I hope it's not too small. It's just another way of kind of looking at each of the different options. It shows the kind of square footages here, and the cost for the renovation, cost for any new construction. So we kind of just put this in chart form so you can look at it a little bit differently here, but it has the same information as the previous slide and the slide coming up here. So as we're packaging this together, we started looking at operational costs, annual operational savings. Now, please keep in mind that this is kind of a snapshot in time. We have several things that we're working on that definitely can positively impact the annual operating expense savings. But as you can see here, status quo, we're really not getting much savings with the district administration office here. We're only projecting about $3,000 worth of efficiency savings by knocking down and building new, even though we're on a smaller footprint. Excuse me, just addressing the deficiencies here, rank 1. We're anticipating for option number 3, if we build a new district administration office and knock down the current one, you can see a little bit of an increase there that we're projecting because of energy efficiencies and the like for that option. But if we do move on from the district administration office with 2A, 2B, and 4, you can see that jumps up to roughly about $45,000 of annual operating expenses. And the next step for us to do is to work with a financial advisor and come up with a plan to determine the annual share and then subtract the annual operating expenses and get your annual net share between that. But we're not quite there yet. So our next slide, hold on one second. All righty. So the next step, we started looking at, in conjunction with this, with Edgewood, understanding the amount of deficiencies that need to be addressed. We started looking at Edgewood from a solar perspective and also a geothermal perspective, not only from a sustainability standpoint, but also from just a cost saving standpoint, understanding there's initial investment for both, but you have very efficient systems for both of these. And, the district's biggest expenses are salary benefits and energy and utilities. So if there's a way to kind of stabilize your energy and utilities over a 30-year period and have control over those, that's a real benefit to the district. And throw some savings in there based on efficient of systems. Again, that's an added benefit for the district kind of moving forward. Both of these from a sustainability standpoint have some really good things in terms of, tying it into the educational curriculum, being transparent with your savings, not only with, the students, but with the community. It's a great community outreach and involvement type projects here. And it also allows you to kind of take a stepping stone moving towards net zero energy, understanding that that's where the codes are going in future years here. But long story short, a dollar saved is a dollar earned. And, we're looking at this from the perspective of how can we help the district build on savings by investing in smart type of systems to give cost certainty year after year for the district. So we started looking at Edgewood again as the kind of test pilot here. And again, this is 30,000-foot view of where could we put the solar field, or not solar field, excuse me, the well field for the geothermal. And you can see we have 2 green boxes here that potentially that a well field could go. Ideally, going under a parking lot would be the best scenario. But you can also put a well field underneath a solar array if you had them ground mounted. So you could get kind of dual benefit from that moving forward. But again, these are just suggested ideas. We wanted to understand if we had enough room on the building site to do it. And we just kind of quickly went through this exercise. From a cost standpoint at Edgewood, the geothermal system, we talked to an installer, kind of went through, again, 30,000-foot view, and roughly the system cost will be about $1.65 million. That might be about 20 to 25% more than a traditional system to replace one for one. but there's also a 30% grant out there that could lower that cost down to $1.1 million. So just kind of keep that in mind with trying to compare apples to apples with cost here. We also took it a step further, understanding that this would have to be done in the future, but in terms of preparation and being proactive, the high school has newer equipment, so we wouldn't be doing anything like this for at least about 10 years or so. But in conjunction with the middle school, because of the location, there might be an opportunity to either share a well field or install one first and then be able to tie into it later and get some added benefits and cost savings from that too. So we looked at both the middle school and high school potential well fields that we could, put on the site here. And again, these are just very, very high altitude conceptual. We understand there'd have to be a lot of work to be done here, but it just kind of gives you a snapshot of what size area we'd be looking at for both. And both for the high school and the middle school, the geothermal system would probably be north or right around 15, at least 15% more efficient than the current system. If we go back a slide here and look, if we did all three locations, that all those systems would be about, $12 million. But if you got that 30% grant that's out there now for geothermal systems, it drops it down to $8.5 million. So a lot of bang for your buck, especially with some of the incentives that are out there. As we went through this process too, we're looking at Edgewood saying, hey, how can we maximize energy efficiency and potentially solar with Edgewood? What we got to thinking is there a way that, not just with Edgewood, could we look at this district wide and could we generate 100% of the district's energy through solar? So McClure, we kind of brought them on board to do kind of a high altitude analysis. And we went through several different scenarios of how can we potentially do this. So you can see on the chart here, we targeted certain buildings. We have Edgewood on there with a roof type system. We have the middle school, we have Lincoln Elementary School, the high school, Barth, Rupert. And what we found going through kind of, again, initial high altitude analysis is that we can at least get up to 90% with what we know. There would be a lot of details to be worked out, but we're all confident that yes, we can hit that 100% threshold either with further analysis or further arrays with throughout the district or with energy conservation measures, in the existing buildings. But this is just looking at how the buildings are performing now, not making the buildings more efficient yet. So if anything, this number is only going to look better once we kind of get into the more details on this. So then we got, sorry, my volume went off there. Then we kind of looked at each individual, school with a high school location. You can see from a rooftop perspective, anything in blue is where the solar array would be. You can see there's still some more real estate up there that we can potentially put some solar arrays. But again, we approach this very conservatively, for our analysis, the initial analysis here. We went on the Barth. Barth was another location that seemed to have some good real estate on the roof that we can maximize. And then also Edgewood, understanding currently there's a lot of ductwork and HVAC up there, but if the system changes or if we go with the same system but a different configuration, we could really maximize the roof area up there and make that generate a lot of energy for the district. We also looked at the middle school. Unfortunately, the middle school has a lot of sloped roofs, so we only have one here on this building, one array on this roof here, and then we're looking potentially at a field area here that we can put solar. And this is the same location that we had the geothermal well field here. Again, this is just the concept. This isn't, anywhere close to being finalized, but it just gives you an idea of where this can go and what we can do. And then also with Rupert Elementary. And then last but not least, Lincoln Elementary, in lieu of doing a rooftop, the idea came up is, can we utilize this hill area and do a ground mount location for Lincoln Elementary? So again, this kind of shows you with all the different schools that we're showing on the our chart here, the amount of energy that potentially can be generated by the district and potentially getting the district to 100% of energy basically being self-sufficient and potentially generating more energy than you need, which puts it back in the grid, which becomes a net revenue generator for the district. So let's see here. So we also wanted to kind of show these in terms of financing with the solar. We have several districts going through this process right now, but there's a couple of different ways to do it. A 25 years level debt. You can see, I'm not sure if you can see the details in here, but like the first 10 years, it kind of balances itself out. But after the 10th year with this structure, everything is net cash flow positive for the gain of 13.5 million, and then also cash flow neutral from out of the gate. This is cash flow positive for the district on this. So again, these are just examples. You'd have to kind of do a strategy for the district to understand what works best for you. But kind of shows you the numbers are really working now based on the incentives that are out there for solar with the Infrastructure Reduction Act and a couple other things. Last but not least, we're working on this kind of timeline chart. Again, this is just a snapshot of where we're currently at. We're still getting some numbers back, but we're looking at total project costs. If we went forward with option number 4, what would that look like? And also went forward with a solar project. Again, we kind of have to take the next step really to kind of understand a lot of the energy savings that will be accumulated, whether it's geothermal or solar, so we can understand the overall financial impact to the district. But so far, everything looks very positive on that front. But I guess we're at a point in time where we need some feedback from the committee on how they'd like to navigate this, that they'd like to take us, if they would like us to take the next step forward and whatnot. So with that, I will open it up for any questions.
Well, I have a question. At Edgewood, I believe that no matter what we do with Edgewood, we can put all the ductwork in the ceiling.
Yeah.
So whether we were going a gas system where the mechanicals would be on the roof and the ductwork's in the ceiling, and if we were to do geothermal, it'd be the same way, except there wouldn't be anything on the roof, but the ductwork would be in the ceiling. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can, that's kind of the easy part. You know, kind of looking at how to reconfigure, you know, the HVAC system in there, but you're absolutely right, Tom. That would be the opportunity to do that with the new system.
Okay. And I'll just mention for the future, it would be handy if you would number all the slides. So
Okay.
when we're referring to something, we can talk about a number. So having taken advantage of my position to ask first, I will now turn this over to Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you. So with the solar and the geothermal, this works if there's federal grants, right? That's what makes it make sense.
Yes, currently, and we're keeping an eye on that too, because there's a lot of stuff going on right now, for lack of a better term. But as of right now, they are available.
Yes. So, and I noticed in some of the slides, it says does not include solar. Is that because the cost of that is that because so much of it needed to be in these other charts to hash out the value of it?
Well, what we didn't want to do, like we do have the costs for the solar system, but what we don't have is the operating expense savings on that. And we want to make sure we have both of those before we throw that out there, because there is a significant annual operating expense savings for the district with going with solar. So we're in the middle of that right now, going through that, and we were rushing to try to get that in this presentation, but we didn't want to throw anything out there that wasn't 100% accurate. So we're very close to having that information, and everything I've seen from other districts' projects, it looks very, very good with the cash flow
Okay.
and comparable systems.
So, and the geothermal is also, it also works with grants. What does it look like without them? Does it also not make sense if there aren't grants available?
No, I think at the end of the day with geothermal, with the payback, without the grants, you're looking at about 12 to 15 years payback. If you get the grants, you're down to 8 to 10 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, it can be sooner than that, but geothermal is one of the most efficient systems that you can put in there of any building. So it costs a little bit more, but it's very efficient and you have certainty. Like a geothermal system can last you 30 to 40 years, whereas your traditional HVAC system, you're probably 20, 25 at most.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm partly coming at this from the angle of I don't trust that there's going to be federal grants. Like I have a hard time making a decision based on that level of like none of us know, right? So that's my main hang up on that. I love green energy. I just don't know that that the solar makes sense to me. Geothermal is a little more appealing. I also have to say, I don't love the idea of big solar arrays all over our fields. So that's just my 2 cents. I just saw the Lincoln one especially, and I was like, no, don't do it. I don't want that kind of taking over that area where it gets used. So that's my 2 cents for the committee, and I'll let other people chime in.
Yeah, and again, we just went through the exercise to see, can we get to 100%?
Understood.
You know,
I got you.
and I think there's other ways to get close to it. If we do pull out Lincoln and do everything roof mount, we'll have to figure out what percentage we'd be at for the district and if that's where the district wants to be. So, but we thought it was a worthwhile exercise to see if we can get there. And then I understand the politics of it. Everybody has a different different view of solar panels, especially on the ground. That's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, my kids literally go out and sled on that hill.
Yeah.
So and as do many other kids from the neighborhood. So I feel like I see that and I'm a little more aware of the effect. So thanks and I do appreciate that it's an exercise, not necessarily the recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a lot of food for thought there. I'm not seeing any hands. I will thank you very much, Mr. Chrisman, for your presentation. And once again, it's over and out.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
And now we'll be moving on to Mr. Willauer.
Good evening, committee members. I just have a few updates tonight for facilities. One, as you're all aware, we had a gas leak yesterday at Barth. It was reported to me in the morning, just as our crews were done snow removal. So we went right back to Barth, and I was on the phone with Pico right away. They were very quick to respond. They were on our property within 45 minutes. We found 2 gas regulators that they were outside, which is a blessing. They were not, there's no interior damage or any smell inside. So they were able to fix both regulators in a timely manner and give us the green light and back in session today. Other notes, I've been working with our insurance company regarding the flood at the middle school, making progress with getting all our quotes and estimates together. And we should, within a couple of weeks, be able to have everything fully submitted and get all of our repairs scheduled for the damage there. And then for our tree project, All Seasons Landscaping is scheduled to start actually tomorrow at the high school in the parking lots. They'll be making their saw cuts to put the new beds in, and we're looking at late March for Rupert to do the same. And once we have some breaks in the weather, we will resume planting. And lastly, with the middle school playground, we're in the planning, back in the planning and construction phase there. So we're hopeful for spring to have everything set so our students will be able to be out in the spring and enjoy the nice weather on a new setup. And that's what I have.
Just check for hands here. No questions, so thank you very much, Mr. Willauer. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now, thank you. And now I see athletic field update on the agenda.
Yes. And actually, Mr. Baker had a conflict tonight that he was going to adjust his schedule for but I said no need. Let me cover this for you. We're just going to give you an update of the things that were asked as of the last time we talked about athletic fields. And if you give me a minute here, I'll see if I can get this to present. I believe you can see my screen. So just to recap, we started to look at the athletic field improvements back in 2022, and we were provided with some options from ELA for the high school and middle school campus. Soil studies were then conducted and surveying was performed on these 3 sites to look at upgrades, and that was at the high school softball field, the lighted auxiliary field, which is near the tennis courts and cafeteria, and Franklin Street fields, which is current soccer fields and adjacent to Franklin Street. It was suggested that we look at other possible sites within the school district as options for natural grass fields as well. So just to circle back to the original, and we then, after we had the soil updates, or I'm sorry, the soil studies conducted, we had some updated estimates, and we kind of laid out an A, B, and C to look at the different costs, because if you are familiar with the study, I think it's like 60 to 80 pages long, and all of these costs are embedded in. So I did my best to try to summarize them into something that looks a little bit more easy to digest. So option A, or package A, is the multi-purpose field, and it's currently in between the driveway and is where the high school softball field is currently. So that, to put a full turf complex in a multi-purpose playable field, the updated estimate was $4.2 million. And that includes different pathways, seating, shelters, options, all of those, different things that would be worked out at a way later time. Option or field package B is the area that's outside of the high school cafeteria and currently has lights. However, that field is not, I guess, PIAA standard for middle school or high school sports. Is a little bit on the smaller side. So the recommendation there would be to, or the option there would be to kind of relocate some of the lighting and redo that field into something that would be more usable for actual like gameplay. And the updated estimate for that was $2.7 million. And we'll get into a little bit more later, but that update, or I'm sorry, that $2.7 million is actually for turf surfaces. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, because it's actually not ideal to put turf in that area based on some of the additional studies that were done with the soil. Option C was Franklin Street, and the idea here was to add a softball infield inlay, so middle school would have an additional field. Currently, we only have 1 field and we have 2 teams. So that becomes a little bit problematic when we are renting field space from the borough and shuttling kids over to those rented facilities. The track, again, we included with all of the entire complex, so we tried to include everything outside of fields as well. The track, the cost to resurface that is $685,000, and that is going to become necessary in the next few years. The tennis courts, we have a drainage issue at the tennis courts. We need to reconstruct the base, add sub-drainage and surfacing. The cost to do that is $257,000. Griggs Stadium, routine maintenance, fertilizing, aerating, $20,000. And the Bobby Shantz baseball field to regrade, do the bullpen fence, and extend the backstop and the warning track with irrigation is $180,000. And then any option to add bathroom facilities on the complex, $650,000. So again, this is just where we, all the areas that we identified, what it would be if we decided to move forward with upgrades and those costs. So the committee, once we looked at Franklin Street Fields, it was recommended that, hey, can you look at any of our other complexes to see if there's a place that you could put a softball field. So the additional locations that were considered on our properties were at Franklin Elementary and at Edgewood Elementary. And working with ELA, it was determined that both sites could be used to house a softball field. That play at Franklin Street would not be impacted, because if we take the Franklin Street fields and convert that into a softball field or the corner of it, we would lose some other playable surface in which we currently use for other sports as well. So the pros to not having that softball field out on Franklin Street would be, well, you'll see in a minute that the costs are actually less to not have that field on Franklin Street, and you would also not lose the soccer field on the high school, middle school campus in the fall, and you would not disrupt girls lacrosse in the spring. There would be no potential disruption to the existing irrigation that's already installed, and you would be creating a new viable field that was not in existence before. So looking at the two sites that were considered, Edgewood, as you can see, the softball field could be laid in kind of in the corner of Beach and Mincer, where the parking lot, it would butt up to the parking lot, and we would have enough room to have full softball field. The other option was at Franklin Elementary, and they could lay a field out in the corner of Mineral, and I'm not sure what that other street is at the moment, but as you can see that, I know these drawings are kind of small, but you can see the infield inlay of the softball field, and we would be able to have a regular size field there as well. And the two estimates that we were provided, $973,000 at Edgewood and $631,000 at Franklin. Okay, so at this point, our recommendations would be, if we were looking at to make these field upgrades, we would recommend constructing the softball field at Franklin Elementary. As you can see, it's the cheapest option, $631,000. I believe it would be the least disruptive to the amount of earth that needs to be configured. It's already pretty flat. Mr. Willauer can probably speak to a few more of the reasons why it would be preferred that it be at Franklin. The second recommendation would be, if we're looking to put a turf field in, it would be on the current high school softball site. So I'll just go back in these slides, and that is section A, where the high school, right between the driveways, where the multi-purpose, we could lay a multi-purpose turf infield in there, and it is where the current softball field is now. In addition, if we were looking to do something at the high school, we would want to address the drainage issues at the tennis courts at the same time. And the reason for that is once you're out there and you're disturbing earth, it is best to try to keep as much of that on our property as possible. We would be able to look at the sub drainage and resurface the tennis courts and address that. So as you know, they're on the hill now, and the drainage just basically ends up right on to the tennis courts. We would also recommend relocating the lights on the auxiliary field and improve that field playing surface to be the appropriate size, and keep that as a natural grass field. Some of the reasons were the soil. I mean, you could make it into a turf field, but we feel if we were able to have at least one turf field, that will allow us to have flexibility in the scheduling, especially when we have weather events, and it will leave the other field as natural grass so that we can continue to use that for middle school, and scheduling separate, play surfaces for high school and middle school teams can all practice at the same time. The all-weather complex would put us in a position where we're comparable to the other PAC school facilities and provide for an opportunity for Pottstown youth athletics as well as some potential rental income. So that concludes the presentation that I have for the update for the athletic fields. And I'll pause to see if anybody has questions. I'm happy to go back to any of those slides as well.
Well, Laura, I'm gonna outrank you at the moment. So we voted in June to pay ELA $305,000 for topographical survey, project-based mapping, geotechnical engineer, underground utility location, site analysis, final land development, and so forth and so on. Have they done any of that?
So that would be the full-blown costs. The 300,000. I mean, that would be if we fully did turf fields and all of what's included in the permits, final design fees, et cetera, et cetera. We're not paying that until we get to that point. So we're basically just being billed as we go. That was the cost of, if you fully do this project, that's what their fees would be. But as you know, we're still early in this stage and we're still deciding what, if anything, our project looks like. So we're on a pay-as-you-go schedule.
So have they done some of this?
Yeah, I mean, they've done they've done the soil studies, they've done preliminary drawings, they've done updated drawings and estimates. I mean, we haven't asked them to pull any permits or anything because we haven't approved anything at this point. But we've paid them for design fees and the additional testing that needed to be done to get to what we have to that. I think Stephen shared that a few days ago, whatever the most recent update was to that study.
Well, the update of the study is exactly the same. Nothing is different at all. The wording is not different except for Franklin and Edgewood. So if they have done some soil testing for the auxiliary field, for the softball field, and some other things, I would be interested in seeing in writing what it is that they've come up with.
Okay, I mean, I can get that.
Good.
Yeah, in a nutshell, the recommendation was the auxiliary field outside the cafeteria is not ideal for turf surfacing. The most ideal situation or location would be the multi-purpose field, which is in between the two driveways at the high school. And then we asked for the ability to, look at the alternate sites. So they brought that back as well.
Okay, so great. So whatever they did, I'd like to see it in writing. I'm sure all the members of the board would like to see it in writing, what it is that they've done so far of this $305,000 contract to lead them to the conclusions they've come to. So I've said my bit. I believe you had your hand up first, Mrs. Johnson.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. The recommendation is to move, we're still just going to have two softball fields, right? Like, if there's not a recommendation to have two at the middle school, high school complex, and then also do one at Franklin.
Correct. It would just be adding one. So the add would be
One
to
total.
Franklin Elementary. Yep.
Okay. And okay, there's a couple thoughts here. What is the main problem that we're solving in saying to have the, I guess, middle school girls have to travel to Franklin? Is the main problem we're solving that it's opening up fields that would otherwise be taken by that softball field? Is that the main concern?
Well, one of our main concerns is we don't have a middle school softball field and we have a middle school baseball field.
Yeah, I'm all over that. Like, I feel like very strongly that we need a middle school softball field. What I'm not happy about is the idea that we would be having the middle school girls have to walk to Franklin to go play softball. I think we have all of our other fields right there at that complex. It is so much more convenient for families. And if we do, and I'm hoping we do, add some sort of bathroom, that it's also convenient for kids playing there at all times of day, even when they can't get into the building. I really don't like the idea of telling the middle school girls, we got you a field, but you got to walk 0.8 miles down to Franklin, and there may or may not be bathrooms down there. And you may or may not have transportation unless we're providing that. You got to carry all your stuff down there. Like, I really, really don't like that aspect of it. I'm totally glad that we're adding a softball field. It's just the location that I'm concerned about. Had another aspect of this. I think I understand wanting to do the turf on the multi-purpose field. That makes sense if the soil is not so conducive to it up by the tennis courts. I liked the idea of it being the smaller field because it was more cost effective, but I'll be content if we're only doing one turf field. I'd rather not do two. So yeah, my main and very significant concern is the idea of having the girls softball be somewhere else altogether.
And I don't mind speaking to that. We can certainly have Mr. Baker render his more more specific opinion. But I think at the end of the day, when we came up with this and kind of fell where we did, we heard that certain board members had some issues as much turf as we had initially talked about. Of course, we heard from some other members of the public as well. We looked at the timing, what it would be like to have, because unfortunately or unfortunately, we got a lot of kids who want to play all at the same time. So that's a factor. And then of course, I mean, the difference between the costs. So it really was kind of just a balancing act of what we were trying to do. How do we spend the least amount of money while getting the most amount of playing time and getting through those Title IX issues that we're all kind of skirting around but know about, and things of that sort. So that is the explanation for it. Is it perfect? No. Do we have the money for perfect? Probably no. So that's what we were thinking. But
How much of a savings is it I felt like when I had looked through the papers, it wasn't like super crazy significant to have the field at Franklin versus at the complex, like on the Franklin Street field.
well,
639 at Franklin Elementary. And
that's Edgewood. I think the scenarios that we were thinking that would work would involve more turf. I could be wrong about that, but my understanding of some of the iteration when we looked at doing all the Franklin Street fields is okay. Now if we're putting another softball field, then we need another field, another turf field to do more stuff with, etc. So but I'll tell you what, Mrs. Johnson, if it's okay with you and the rest of the committee, we'll write that one down and ask Mr. Baker so that I don't mess that up.
That's fine. I'm just seeing the value of the field on Franklin compared to the value of the field at Franklin Elementary, and that's where I'm seeing that's where I'm not clear. So I'll definitely be happy to get a little more clarity later on when we can figure that out.
I can say it is upwards of $1 million to stay on location. I don't know the exact number, but it is a little over $1 million to stay on
it's
location.
$1,036,000 to put it on the Franklin Street at the high school, and then it's $639,000 to put it at Franklin Elementary. So it's like $400,000.
So, okay, so the difference is 400,000.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Because on here, doesn't it say 700,000 for the Franklin Street softball field specifically?
I think
Or is it all the other stuff we wouldn't have to do?
$639,000 for Franklin Elementary.
No, but I'm saying if we put it on the Franklin Street field, when I saw the softball field, and now I can go up and look here, looking at the softball field on Franklin Street, and I realized we really like Franklin around here, so that gets confusing. But I thought that it was all right there, 740 for the softball infield.
Oh, just for the
But maybe-
softball and right. Yeah, okay.
Well, I might be making wrong assumptions about what that means. Like maybe we don't have to do any, maybe C disappears entirely if we do the softball field at Franklin Elementary. And if so, then yeah, I see that $400,000 difference.
Yeah,
Still
it
not
does. It's
convinced
an
it's worth
either
it, but-
or. It's a either,
Okay.
like, yeah.
So
I
it's
mean,
all of C or the Franklin Elementary softball field.
yes.
Okay. That helps me understand why we were seeing savings.
Mr. Klein,
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. My question, pretty quick one, I think. The multi-purpose field the administration is proposing to put turf. What would that be lined for? Like, what are you hoping to play on that field, on that surface?
I believe it's lined for multiple things. That would probably be a Mr. Baker question, but I know it's lined for lacrosse for sure. I think soccer
Hockey.
can be played.
Field hockey, lacrosse, soccer. I can still do softball, like multiple things for sure. It can also be a practice field, etc.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Spence,
Thank you. My question is, are we following the data with these decisions? Because based on what I read, it appears as if, I could be reading it wrong, that overall sports participation is down. I mean, I think football is down by 62%. What's increasing, oddly enough, is golf and soccer, and I think lacrosse, but all of the other sports are down. So if this is something we're paying for in the future, even though it's maybe really busy now, but in the future, is this a 50-year project, 20-year project, 30-year project? And if we're spending this money for 30 to 50 years out and the participation declines, then are we really spending the money the way we should be spending the money? Can anybody answer that question as far as are we following the data?
I can try to answer that. May I ask, before I say something that isn't accurate? You said what sport was down 60%, Mrs. Spence?
Football,
Football? Okay.
62%.
And is that a statewide, nationwide? That's not our data, right? Or is it?
I think the data was Pennsylvania. Locally, I'm not sure if I read it local, but I think locally what I saw the increase was golf, lacrosse, maybe soccer, track and field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good question. My immediate response would be that I don't think we've seen a dip in participation in the Pottstown School District. And in other places where the fields were more conducive to more students and more play, they actually got more participation. For us, we've added several sports. A couple of them don't have anything to do with fields, like girls volleyball. But you heard about some other teams like our middle school softball and some others. So we've actually, and we really do need to grow our middle school program, especially because that feeds into our high school program. And we know that from the data side, the more involved our students are, the better their attendance is and everything else. But it is a good question, and I think one that deserves some attention. I would think because on the other side, when we don't have competitive fields and good-looking fields, when families come, that is sometimes a decider on whether or not they join our school, etc. Now, I say sometimes because I have no data on that, but I have definitely heard that question multiple times. So
So
that
you're
is
saying because of the way the fields look, they decide not to come to Pottstown School?
only that we've had some of that feedback, and that feedback has been part of some of the dialogue that you will hear publicly with regard to why some
Well, I
schools.
mean, I'd rather just focus on the data we have in the report instead of like
That's
rumor
fine
and
by me.
stuff. But
Yep.
in the report, and I'm not saying that we don't need softball fields and all of the things that we're doing. My question is, are we tracking these updates and the amount of money that we're spending based on the data, like real data, not gossip and rumor and um things of that nature? I just really want to know, like, if we're tracking it based on the data that's in the report. I see tennis, um because tennis has increased. I see in that they're doing the tennis court over, right? So I guess that's one, but what about the other expenses? And if I could just get an answer to that question, I appreciate it.
Mr. Armato.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hilton. So, wow, I started out thinking I was going to say one thing, and now there's so many things to want to respond to. First, Ms. Spence, I do remember seeing just today some numbers that I think you're also referring to. There was actually three sets, a set of national numbers, state numbers, and then Pottstown School District numbers. However, it eludes me to where I saw that, and I'm not able to get right back to it. I will search for it over the evening, so I have that information at hand. But you are correct that in some sports, both nationally, statewide, and locally, we've experienced increases, and in some we've experienced decreases. To that end, next issue, I think I've stated before, I hope clearly, that I am not necessarily a big fan of artificial turf. I could be convinced of a one turf field that could be multi-purposed and serve a number of needs. And it would still take some convincing, but I could be convinced of that. To the third issue, middle school sports and specifically girls softball, if in fact we are trying to promote middle school sports for much more than just the physical activity, but also for the social, mental support that it provides students, for the ground level foundation that it provides students for success, building the foundation for success in the future, then I am definitely in favor of doing things that promote middle school sports. As we speak to it directly with girls softball, I do not think that having the girls softball players be able to transport themselves from the middle school to Franklin and then back home again does anything to promote activity in that sport. So I am not in favor of a plan that puts middle school softball at Franklin Elementary School. I think I covered all my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armato. Mrs. Kansianik.
Yes, I have two questions, I think. The first being, well, not a question. I'll echo John or Mr. Amato and Mrs. Johnson in that I don't think the girls' softball team should be walking to Franklin. The advantage of being at home is you're at home. And you lose that if you move anywhere. If the field is going to be over there, we should definitely be busing the students and staff. And then my second question would be along the lines of participation and what Mrs. Spence and Mr. Amato mentioned. I'd be interested to see what numbers we have compared to previous years, and also the numbers at the beginning of the seasons and at the end, because it's wildly different. And then decisions are made based off those very first practices when you have a ton of kids and it drops off. So I would be interested in that stat as well. Thank you. So actually, I didn't have any questions.
Okay. Mrs. Bearden fell off my screen.
She is still there.
It's okay, thank you. In our area, we are experiencing
Oh, that's
power
why.
outages.
Okay, go ahead. I'm
So
sorry.
I actually have 0 electricity right now. That said, I appreciate the discussion and the presentation. Obviously, everybody is right on the mark as far as what I was thinking. My concern, obviously, is that we're prudent. We have, and I know this is everyone's concern. That's not to say that it's not the rest of the committee's concern, but at the sake of reiterating what some of our community and taxpayers may be thinking, we're at a time that is quite transient in what we will and will not have in a fiduciary way. That said, we always want to make sure that our students are engaged and that we're supporting them and keeping their focus, aligned with school and education. And we know that sports and extracurriculars as a whole support that. We are at an advantage in having our middle school and high school areas in close proximity. That is a big advantage to us. It is also because it is even more close quartered, if you will, than other districts. We are also having to look at spatial accommodation. So I really, really would like to see that any fields that are being proposed are fully delineated out on a mapping with parking, foot traffic, what that actually looks like, and then the topography of it with, I don't want us to lay anything down that we have to follow up with because of sinking. And then we have placed a field that is, again, not usable on the level that we anticipate, right? So that would just frustrate the students and the coaches even more to have yet another field that, to no fault of our own, becomes enthralled in a non-user friendly component. And then we have the fiscal task of trying to build that field back up, because it always looks great when it initially is laid. It always is pretty to the eye, and I'm not so focused just on aesthetics. It needs to be sustainable, and what the cost is to ensure any field that we look at it is sustainable. Obviously, I'm big on wanting our outdoor bathrooms. That's been something I've wanted for years. I've wanted our softball field to have the proper coverage, the proper visibility, and the proper publicizing as all of our other sports. And that, along with our tennis teams, which have been consistent, and our courts just have not been viable in use. So it's not so much that we are just looking to repair or enhance our tennis courts for aesthetics. It's just to make them viable and usable. Half of the season is canceled because they're rained out simply because of the slope. And we know anytime you have that sort of pitch, you're going to have drainage issues, and that's what we've dealt with those courts for several years. So that's, whether there's an uptick in any other sport, tennis has remained consistent. But the costs, I think, are the biggest piece for me. Our budget is is problematic, what we actually will receive, what our taxpayers can absorb. Those are major issues for me, major concerns. I don't want to downplay our attempt to bring our fields to where they need to be, because that goes without saying. I just want to see something where we are delineating exactly these options in a more finer method before we make decisions, and look at those costs again, and along with the topography studies to make sure they're viable and won't just sink are major points for me. So if that's something that we could have, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, seeing no more hands, I don't think I've missed any. Then we will conclude this portion of the meeting. Rather than moving my papers around. And move on to finance.
Okay. I think we're back to the agenda. So I'm going to move through the agenda items that I have for this month. And then I do have a very, very high level first look at the budget. And with your permission, I'll move into that, Mr. Hilton. So the first item I have is pretty standard special ed contract for wood services. The next item that we'll have for approval is our Ready to Learn Tax Equity Supplement Resolution, which is actually the same thing as the Act 55 Tax Equity Supplement Payment Resolution. Those are the same things. So part of last year's budget included a supplement that came through the Ready to Learn block grant, and that included tax equity payments. So we are required by law to pass this Act 55 resolution that provides for the payment of tax equity supplements by the Commonwealth to school districts. And the resolution that we adopt will state that we will be, how are we going to use those tax equity funds, and the offsetting of the millage rate is one of the options that we can put in the resolution. We're going to put all of them in the resolution, and then that way that covers us when we move through the budget process. So mitigating, preventing an increase in the millage, supplementing the amount calculated by the school district for the homestead farmstead exclusion, establishing, maintaining, or expanding programs provided that the supplement rebates provided under the Taxpayer Relief Act, mitigating or replacing the loss of revenue received by the school district resulting from a decision of the Court of the Commonwealth within the previous 5 years, and reducing debt. So that will be the resolution that we'll have on for your consideration next week. The next item that we have is the real estate tax exoneration, and this is an annual resolution where we turn our delinquent taxes over to the delinquent tax collectors. And this year's delinquents are a little over $1 million. The Act 57 waiver is, again, another annual resolution, and this waiver states that we would waive any additional late penalty charges if a property was assumed like a newly acquired property, and if you know, the way that the tax bills are sent out to the old property owner, if you were the new property owner and you did not get notification of your tax bill, it would allow the school district to waive those late penalty charges if the taxpayer pays their real estate taxes in a certain time, in the allotted time period of the penalty period. To date, this was new in 2022, and I have not received any requests for waiving late fees due to that allowance under the Act 57 waiver, just an update. The next item will be the acknowledgement of the financial audit, which Mr. Bieber reviewed with us tonight. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on policy 622. Mr. Boyer will be putting this through his policy committee next month. And this is the change that Mr. Bieber had spoke to us tonight about, the threshold for federal funds. So currently our capital asset policy states that we will, any item that's over $5,000 is considered a capital asset for GASB purposes. And our recommendation is to increase that threshold to $10,000, and that aligns with the federal funding threshold. And that will change, will be, like I said, Mr. Boyer will put that change through the policy committee, but I wanted to give board members some background on exactly what and why we would make that recommendation. So that concludes the items that I have for approval. And Mr. Hilton, I assume you're okay with me to move through our very high level first look at the budget.
I am indeed, and I see no hands up, so I think we're ready to go.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to start with, we're early in this process. We received the governor's budget proposal. I received the PASBO in-depth line by line analysis of the governor's proposal last Friday, less than a week ago, and I was able to put together some high-level budget numbers, and I want to walk through that tonight. I assume we will get into much more detailed conversations about some of these budget numbers and what our historical expenditures have been, so that we can, have conversations as we move through this process. So again, back in September, the Act 1 index was released. The base index for 25-26 is 4%. Pottstown adjusted index is 5.8%. In November, the Finance Committee took action on the resolution for opting out of exceeding taxes above the Act 1 adjusted index. We passed that at the November board meeting, and tonight we're going to take a look at revenues and expenditures and where we're going to start this budget process. So historically, you can see that Act 1 index and Pottstown index were always higher than the base index because we have certain adjustments. Adjustments are made for different factors such as median values, personal income, and they allow for us to actually raise taxes more than the base index based on some of these demographics that we have. So just to remind board members, we raised taxes 2 times in the past 10 years. So in 1819 and 1920, we raised taxes to the full index, and this was the timing aligns with when the Pottstown Hospital was acquired and went into nonprofit status. So in the past 10 years, we raised taxes 2 times, and that was in 1819 and 1920. So our tax base, this is the amount of what we can assess to our taxpayers. And as you can see, that has decreased since 10 years ago. But within the last 5 years, we've remained pretty steady at $760 million. So the Act 1 index, what does that mean for us this year? The base index is 4%. The adjusted index is 5.8%. Obviously, if we do nothing, we're not going to see any additional revenue to our budget. But if we are to move forward with some type of a tax increase, this is what that would mean in terms of dollars. So if we were to go to the base index, we could generate $1.2 million. And at our adjusted index, it would be 1.7, a little over $1.7 million. So the 25-26 budget assumptions, again, we've put the or estimated the state revenues at about 50% of the governor's proposal. We'll walk through some of those revenues so we can see what that means. This year, the 50% isn't as substantial as it was in the prior year. Last year, our budget was predicated a lot on how much were we going to get from the state because there was such a large increase. And this year, those large increases are not as large as they were in prior years. Right now, we have our PA property tax rent and rebate program. The revenues that I have in for the purpose of first look, I did not put any dollars into that program. We are expecting a healthcare and insurance increase of 4%. Charter, school tuition, special ed tuition, these increases have been real, they've been painful, and the numbers that I used are based on where our actual, what we're seeing today, what our tuition invoices are looking like, as well as transportation. These are all high target areas. The funding for federal that is included in this first look is flat from prior year. Again, lots of speculation, no real recommendation as to what to put in for those budgets. So we're just going with flat funding to the federal subsidies. No change in staffing and programming. So we'll just jump right into it. So the assumed increases that we're seeing in salaries and benefits are a little over $5 million. We definitely have some work to do. We definitely feel like we can make some efficiencies. We have some staff that are going to be retiring, and we'll be able to pick up some of those efficiencies, hopefully, in terms of dollars, and be able to make this, to reduce this assumed increase down a little lower. Special ed services, the 300 category, that's all of our professional services. We've seen astronomical increases in this area post-COVID. The cost plans for services that our students are required to have in IEPs, that solely drives this line item. And we can move into, I can deep dive into further analysis of some of these categories because I think board members are really going to want to see some of that. Transportation, this is another area that post-COVID really has affected us. The way, I don't know if board members recall, in tonight's presentation from Mr. Bieber, he alluded to a post-COVID catch-up subsidy deduction that was made in the transportation category. So the way the transportation formula works from the state is it's lagged a number of years behind. So last year and the prior year, we got to experience some of the COVID shutdown. If you'll recall, we shut down in March of 2021, I think. 2021. I'm trying to go backwards and think, and I'm in multiple years at one time. So we had about a third of the year that we didn't incur any expenses for transportation. The following year, we had very little transportation because we were in a virtual format. So that catch up is now happening where we're starting to see our share of expenses that come directly out of our subsidy for special education. And that's what that transportation subsidy deduction was for. Tuitions is another area that we're just seeing increases, special ed tuitions, charter tuitions, and I actually, just to show you what those numbers look like in terms of, this is any tuition that we pay. So it includes cyber charter, brick and mortar charter, special ed placements, the majority of the regular ed would be for charter because we don't typically place regular ed students, but we do place special ed students and students who elect to go to a charter school. So back in 2020, 2021, we were about $5.7 million in tuitions. And next year's budget, we're looking, if we're going to increase in the same allowance that we have in the past few years, I'm looking at $10.9 million. So just over 2 years, that's a $2.4 million increase. And that's, as you can see, I mean, in our budget, that's a lot to try to make up for. Okay, moving on to the revenues, governor's proposal. We budgeted a little over $20 million. The proposed BEF was a little over $21 million. So like I said, there's about $500,000 that if it's funded in the full amount that was proposed by the governor this month, you know, we have about $500,000 that we could potentially pick up. I'm not sure. I wish it was better than that, but you know, we'll take every dollar. We have seen substantial increases to our BEF, but if on the converse side, if you see, you know, the way that the expenditures and the tuitions are increasing as well, I mean, there goes all of the increases that we're seeing. 23-24 actual revenues, just for reference, in the basic ed subsidy amount was 19.5, and this year's projected is 20.8. So the budgeted amount that we have is $20,500,000. And that is because you can see there's a portion of the revenues that come through as our base, and then there's a portion that are student weighted, and that's driven by enrollments and a few other factors that weight, like poverty's one of the weights that goes into that formula. So that's how these numbers are driven. Special ed subsidy, again, this was an area, I think it was 1.5% up from last year. But just so you can see the difference in between what the subsidy dollars we get for special ed and what we actually pay out the door. Last year, we paid a little bit over $18 million and we received $3.2 million. The Ready to Learn, this was an area last year that changed dramatically for us. And like I mentioned earlier, we had a piece of tax equity dollars that we have to pass that resolution for those dollars, and we will get last year's dollars, or we're to use the $24-25 in the 25-26 budget. So that's the $1,048,614. So the Ready to Learn proposed, the total Ready to Learn proposed block grant for Pottstown this year is $6.9 million. A portion of that is for the tax equity, another portion of that is for adequacy, and then just the regular base amount is $4.9 million. Last year's total Ready to Learn money was $4.9 million, and that included a base of a little over $3 million, and then similar amounts for adequacy and the tax equity. So this is an area that if we are to see the full amount, you know, we could potentially pick up about $1 million here. I conservatively budgeted it at 50% of the governor's proposal because that's typically what I do. Hopefully we will see that full amount, but just in terms of where we are tonight, what's in the budget is $5.9 million. So first look, we are short about $9 million. And if you recall the areas that we targeted, or that we really need to dive really deep and see what kind of efficiencies we can make within these areas. I mean, these are all areas that are up a lot of money. So that pretty much explains the deficit. I'm happy to go through. I'll probably first pause for questions because I'm sure we'll have questions. But I would like to go deeper dive into some of these areas so that we can get a good understanding and really see if there is room for efficiencies, improvements, programmatic changes, etc. Make this full screen so everybody can see. Okay.
Tom, your mic's off. I assume you're going to say that you'll take your privilege as chair, right?
No, I was gonna say, I'm gonna ask Mrs. Oakley to run this at this point, so I do think you had your hand up first, Laura.
Okay. So two questions. One, I see, and I understand why you budgeted $0 for the property tax and rent rebate program. How much money is still left in that program that is unused from this past year?
Oh, hold on a second. Let me see. I had that. Oh, okay. All right, let me keep going. I stopped there because I felt like it was a safe stopping point because I knew there would be questions. But let me just go right into that because this is Homestead Farmstead, which we know. Just to recap the program. So where are we year to date with that program? So we've rebated 190 applicants, and we've rebated $87,000. And if you recall, the amount, there was about 900 that were estimated that we could rebate. That's what the state had rebated, about 900 applicants, and we've rebated about 190 of them. So I think we put in, let me see, about $682,000 in last year, and we only used about 90,000 of that.
Okay. So that's still there. Is that basic, like, where does that fit in then with this year's budget? Are we basically just saying like we could still run that program off of money that's been appropriated in the past year?
Yeah, we would have to appropriate the dollars in this budget though.
Okay.
Yeah.
We would just be moving them over. Okay. That makes sense. And in my committee, we might talk a little bit about how to make sure people know that that program is there. The other question I had, unless you want to go through the rest of your presentation, I don't want to cut you off if you were thinking you would just keep going.
No, I mean, the rest of it, I'm happy to go through it. It was just the homestead, farmstead, the fund balance as to where we are with fund balance. I mean, I can review that with board members. I'll also put this on, reluctantly put this on our website. I hate it so much because the deficit is
it's terrible.
that great. That I want to close this down and not look at it and just wait till it gets better. But unfortunately that we can't do that.
Not how it works. Gotta feel the pain.
Yes, we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, no, we do. My other question is related to the special ed side. Was it 18 million that were our special ed costs? And about 3 point something comes from the state?
3.2, yeah.
And the governor's budget proposal started at well under inflation in terms of what they were going to.
Or 1.5% from like last year.
So I'm just wondering, the other, we get some federal special ed funding, right?
We get some IDEA money, and that's about $900,000.
Okay,
Again,
so it's not a huge amount of money to begin with, but okay, that's just was curious because I knew that there was some amount of that came from the federal government. That's all I have. Thank you for putting this together. And yes, it is incredibly painful to look at, but I kind of was gathering that as we went through the earlier part, and I saw in each category the millions. Yeah. So thanks.
Oh, okay, Mr. Hilton, he asked me. So my upper left is Mr. Klein and then Mrs. Spence.
So my question, the Department of Education looks like it's going to go away. If it goes away, that's mostly the safeguards for special needs students, I believe. Does that change anything at all, Mr. Rodriguez, for us?
Yeah, great question. So there is a lot of tumultuous talk coming from the federal level. People who are, I believe the expression is long in the tooth, people who have gone through some political change in the past, have said that there probably will be some level of rendering, but no one believes on both sides of the aisle that we're going to be taking away things like Title I funding. You can affect a lot of change without touching those funds. So although I am my mom always said if you want a guarantee, buy a toaster. So I'm not guaranteeing anything. But what this is what I'm hearing, and part of what you guys asked me to do is keep my ear to the proverbial ground. So we do believe that there may be some differences in funding. We also believe that there's some talk about federal voucher programs. I don't know if that'll actually get off the ground, but there is talk about that. But in terms of some of our major fund sources, most people believe that and I say most, take that for what it is. But what I'm hearing is that the pass-through stuff is not the stuff that's gonna go on the ground. It's the assistant to the assistant to the assistant in Washington that is the supposed target. So that's what I've got right now. Yeah, we'll wait and see though.
Thank you.
Mrs. Spence?
Yes, my question is what amount of funds do we get from, well, not we, the state gets from the Federal Department of Education? And just to comment, I do believe everything the president says, because so far what he said and what he campaigned on, he's been implementing it at rapid speed. So what's the plan when the Department of Ed does go away, our funds go away? How can we create a budget based on just state funds? And if state gets their funds from federal, what does that look like?
I can answer in part, and Maureen, you can answer in part as well.
I rather Maureen
Yeah,
answer,
sure,
please.
sure, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
The portion of that we have in our budget right now of federal funds is $3.6 million.
Okay.
So what would happen with those funds? It would all depend on what happens with them at the federal level. If they pass them through to the state, and I'm sure Stephen can give more intel on this because that's more of his area.
There are federal funds that pass through the state. The governor took action today, filed a lawsuit over the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That just hit the news wire this afternoon, I believe. So that there would be an effect depending upon what federal line items go through. That would affect the state budget. But Maureen gave the federal budget that comes to us that's completely accurate, but it probably wouldn't be the end if all money is cut off to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. And then my last statement is that what I'm hearing is that there'll be one public school per area based on funds, and that the the voucher funds will be for students to go to private school, charter schools, Christian schools, and those that are left, which is probably most of 99.9% of the special ed kids and the minority kids would be all shuffled to one school. So in per county, which is the way it is in rural communities, how I guess you can't answer that, so I'll just leave it like that. Thank you.
Mr. Amato?
Yes, thank you. So I don't know that I have any other questions from the information that you provided. And as some people have already talked about tonight, there's a great deal of speculation about what the future holds, particularly as it applies to the federal government and what the federal government may or may not do that will have effects on us. That being said, the bottom line is we in Pottstown are still responsible for providing quality educational opportunities for the 3,300 students that we have, and do it in a manner that is cost effective to our local citizens who carry a large burden in terms of funding our school district. So again, I don't know that I have any questions, but to me, it seems pretty clear that the administration will have to be working very closely with the school board, because it sounds like there's going to be a lot of hard decisions to be made in the very near future as it relates to funding, as it relates to programs and facilities and personnel.
So, Mrs. Oakley, do you have anything further?
No, I mean, unless you want me to go back through the fund balance slides, I mean, that really concluded what I had for tonight.
Well, why don't you just hit the fund balance side?
Sure.
Certainly happy that we have a healthy fund balance.
Yes, that is true. Let me figure out where I left off. Okay, so homestead, farmstead, this is the standard. This was an area that the governor proposed that there would be more funding that would flow through this, so that would be a positive for us if we do see more funding, because this would in turn reduce those approved homestead farmsteads, and they would see that rebate on their tax bill. So that would be very helpful to us if there is additional funding there. That doesn't get certified until May, those dollars, so we won't know that final number until then. Again, the PA property tax rent rebate, this is just a recap of the program and the dollars that were available last year, because we did implement this program into last year's budget. The total that were eligible at the Pottstown level, and the number of rebates that we've provided so far this year. Okay, the fund balance. So updated with 23-24, you can see that our unassigned fund balance is a little $6.7 million. We have some funds that are still committed for PSERS. We have a chunk of funds that are assigned for capital, assigned for this current year's budget, assigned for tuition and transportation, and we have a separate capital projects fund, bringing the total fund balance to a little over $27 million. And why?
I could jump in here for a second, but we
Sure.
just learned from our audit for 23-24 that our fund balance is actually 25 million, not 27.8.
No, it's 25, and then the capital project, so the total is 27.8.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. And that's my final slide. So I will stop there unless anybody else has any questions on this slide.
Okay, it looks like we're good. And looking at the agenda, did you have some information, or was that the information was the budget?
Just the budget, and our next meeting will be March 13th.
Okay. And is there any public comment?
Not at this time, Mr. Hilton.
Then this committee meeting is over, and I'll turn things over to Mrs. Johnson.
Okay. I'll open the meeting. I assume there is no public comment.
Not at this time, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you. I believe the first thing on our agenda, and I will try to keep this committee as speedy as possible. Oh, here, share screen. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I trust everyone can see that, and of course, tell me if you can't. So it is Black History Month. And so we're going to go through just a few of the updates of what some of our classrooms across the district have been doing. And all I did to pull this together was just to go through mostly social media, and there's one exception to that, just to see what people have been posting about. There's been a lot of cool classroom projects. So this one is at Lincoln. Kids were doing like obviously drawings, and they were putting up art displays in the hallway. At Rupert, they had some book recommendations depending on the most searched speech or the most searched NASA mathematician, and they had books for each one of them from somebody from Black history or current, which looked like a pretty cool display there. In Mrs. Bieber's class in environmental science at the high school, they were studying and doing a project revolving around Black environmentalists. So I thought this was pretty cool. I asked her if I could share a few of her slides. They had a rubric attached to it, and were doing some research on each of these folks and had linked up to different YouTube videos for each one of them. I really loved that picture. At Rupert, they also had a display. Sharing this flyer. It's with Pottstown Community Arts and the NAACP. They're doing a youth art competition that I thought was worth sharing. I know we've shared this out on our social media as well, and I'm sure it's in the emails that go out. Definitely worth doing and sharing with any artist in your life. And then at Franklin, we had these great little projects that the kids were doing. And the little thing on the paper says, they're coloring the different people. It says paste the people in the windows to show that they can sit wherever they want on the bus, which I thought was very cute. And I believe this is the last one. All of our different students and their dreams. Oh, it isn't the last one. And more book projects. So I enjoyed looking through these. I really appreciate all of the schools that put what they're doing in their classrooms on social media for everybody to enjoy, so that we can kind of see get a window into what's going on in the district. And if I can get out of my little presentation over here. Okay. Next on the agenda, I believe Anthony is going to be doing a social media report.
Yes, and Mrs. Johnson, if it's okay, I'm going to intro him so that he can get himself ready.
100%.
And go ahead, Mr. Santiago, you can start your presentation whenever you like there, and make it slideshow there so it's nice and big. And so members of the committee, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Santiago. This is his first presentation in public, so please give him some grace. But he's done a really good job of learning and growing into his position, and he does care and watch the data to make sure that our community is engaged. So with that, I will ask Mr. Santiago to present.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, for the kind words and the introduction. Good evening, board members. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight. This is my second year in my role as communication specialist. I'm a resident of Pottstown and a very proud graduate of Pottstown of the class of 2017. Before I start, I just want to say it's a privilege to work with an amazing team, because they taught me so much of just how to do my job, how to get things organized, and just want to give them a quick shout out before I start. So I'm going to share the analytics of our social media and our website for 2024. And as I go through, feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so this is our Facebook page visit store in 2023. And I want to show you how much our numbers grew from 2023 to 2024. This is going to be the pattern as I show the analytics tonight. So as you can see, Facebook is still our strongest platform. In 2023, we had well over 94,000 page visits. I also include our top 5 interacting posts of our pages with number 1, the father-daughter dance with 287 likes, all the way down through number 5, which is the elementary principals in Halloween costumes with 101 likes. And if you see at the bottom there, is our page likes, and you can see from 2022 from 2023, we lost 413 followers. Now in 2024, our page visits did drop to approximately 88,000 visits, but our numbers of likes still increase. This past year, of our top, starting up with number 1 is our graduation post with 238 likes. And at the bottom is our graduation post part 2 with 128 likes. So this is a more deeper dive of our top posts of 2023. And this is just how our numbers did. So you can see how many accounts we reached, our likes, reactions, comments, and shares. So in 2023, the father and daughter dance reached over 19,000 different accounts with 21 shares. In 2024, you can see again that how many accounts we reached, our likes, reactions, comments, and shares. May was our most interactive month because of the end of the year activities like graduation, prom, formal, and field day. Moving on to our Zoom board meetings numbers. These are our total number of views that we've gathered from Facebook from 2022 to 2023. So they gathered similar views from those 2 years. And in 2024, we increased our viewership. We averaged over 1,000 views between March and June. So our numbers throughout the year stayed well over 500 viewers in 2024. And you may see in December that there's no number listed, and that's just because of technical difficulties. So we may never know what our total view would be for December, but we can safely assume that our viewership was strong and based on the trend that we were receiving in 2024. All right, so the next 2 sections are going to focus on our Facebook audience, which includes age and gender and top cities. So if we start with age and genders, it's broken up into age brackets. So you can see in 2023 that 77.5% of our audience is women and the 22.5% is our men. So our strongest female audience is between the age of 35 and 44. And in 2024, not much has changed. Again, our strongest number is the 35 through 44 age bracket. The next parts are Facebook's top city audience. Number 1 in 2023 is Pottstown with 43.2%. Philadelphia takes second with 3.2%. And in 2024, you can see that Pottstown's on top with 39.2%. Philadelphia's in second with 4.5%. So from these analytics, you can see that our Facebook audience is made up with our alumni, family, and students. So in our next section, we're going to focus on Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. So let's start with Instagram. In 2022, we ended with 1,369 total followers. And in 2023, which is the year that I took over my current position, we grew by 477 followers. As for X, we did lose 8 followers at the end of 2023, but by losing so little, it didn't really affect our interactions on posts. So if you see on both, I included our top 3 most liked posts for 2023. And in 2024, we grew by another 206 more followers on Instagram for a total of 683 new followers for the last 2 years between 2022 through 2024. And the majority of our Instagram audience are students. Now on X, we did lose 40 followers. And we believe the reason is because of X went through a transition of ownership and name change. So I also included some insights, more of our Instagram. So you can see our most liked was our prom 2024 with 267 likes. And on the right are more the insights of how many counts we reached. And second, our most viewed is our high school graduates elementary walk post with a total of 232 likes. And finally for Instagram, our third most viewed is our graduation post with a total of 225 likes. So Instagram is a clear second for our use of social media, and we're very pleased with the growth. Moving on to X, the platform doesn't really permit us to get a deep insights of like how deep we got for Facebook and Instagram. So I went with our most reach. So you can see from the number at the bottom of the right here is the number of accounts that we've reached. So in 2024, our number one is back to school post from 6ABC. Second, we have Juneteenth posts with 299 accounts reached. And then third, we have our first unified track and field senior day with 85 accounts reached. And the last section I'll present tonight will focus on the numbers on our website. So it'll include the following: the website users by city, all most visited pages, browsers used for website, and different devices used across the website. So this is the all website users. You can start in 2023 that we had a total of 138,000 total visits for the entire year of 2023. And in 2024, we reached 156,000 total views for 2024. So we grew by 18,000 from last year. This is our users by cities in 2023. So you can see Pottstown's on top, and you see other cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and the reasons again are because of alumni and families. In 2024, again, Pottstown's on top, with New York taking second, followed by Philadelphia. Moving on to the website's most visited pages. In 2023, you can see the Pottstown School Districts that is the most top visited. This is the homepage for our website. And the master calendar, which is actually the district calendar, takes second. And a third is the food menu for 2023. And in 2024, if you look at the top, it's blank, but that represents the homepage. Second is the master calendar, and the district food menus takes third because we always want to know what's today for lunch. And if you see all the way at the bottom, the alumni yearbooks takes number 10, and then number 9 says default, but that's just another URL for our homepage. Next parts are browsers used for the website. The analytics are self-explanatory. You can see Chrome takes the lead with 84,000. Safari was second in 2023. And again, in 2024, Chrome once again takes top, and that has to do with the number of students having Chromebooks. So that's like the automatic browser for Chrome. And the last thing I'll share with you tonight is our website devices used. So you can see the jump from 2023 to 2024 of users using desktops, and that's just because of student uses. And you can also see the jump with the smart TVs taking third in 2024, and that has to do because the way how we live today, how quick it is to access the internet. Many homes now have smart devices like Google or Alexa built in on their smart TVs, so it allows users to talk from the remote and display the website from their TVs. And teachers also have smart boards in their classrooms to access the site. And that is all I have. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned something from my presentation tonight. Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Amato, and I are open to any questions.
Thank you. That was a really good presentation. Thank you for doing that. Does anybody have questions? I have one. With the on the website, you don't have to pull it back up, but I noticed at times there was sharp spikes. Um, one in April, one in January. Do we know what those are? I assume we kind of have an idea of what those are.
It's a good
Not that you
question.
need, yeah. If you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine. They jumped out to me because they were dramatically higher than the rest.
Mr. Rodriguez, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. And you can drop the share as well. It's almost always event driven. So if I were to guess the April spike would have been the father-daughter dance or mother-son dance, one of those two that we did, during and after, or excuse me, before and after COVID. May is it's always the graduation, prom, etc. So yeah, good observation. That would explain the majority of it.
Okay. Mrs. Bearden.
Thank you. I just wanted to say for it being his first time, it did very well. It's a lot of great data for us to look at and see where, we want to go forth if we're looking for engagement. And so I appreciate his presentation. Thank you for having it.
Thank you, Mrs. Bearden.
Mr. Armato.
Yes, thank you. So I want to echo that a little bit. Anthony came on board pretty young and inexperienced in a lot of ways, and I will say that he has done an excellent job of being a good student and learning what it takes to be involved with community engagement and community communications. And he has some very strong areas, one which we really didn't get to see or talk about here tonight, and that is at the video end of his productions. He is doing an excellent job of video production, which has provided us with an opportunity, specifically Mr. Rodriguez, with an opportunity to have an excellent mode of communications that we've used both internally and externally to a great advantage. So in terms of us getting our return on investment from a graduate, I would say that we have done well with Anthony Santiago. Sorry. Sorry, Anthony.
It's all good. I appreciate the kind words, Mr. Amato.
Awesome. One other question. Is it fair to say, and anybody can answer this, is it fair to say that our best social media posts, whether they are Facebook or to some degree Instagram, that we get the most traffic and the most engagement when you've got lots of different pictures with lots of different people? Like that parents, for example, when the superintendent goes into the classroom and is giving out awards and you've got these pictures with, Billy and Jada and Mr. Rodriguez, because they both got their growth awards, and there's 70 such pictures, and you've got parents and family members who are proud of Billy and Jada sharing these pictures, that those are some of our most highly trafficked, most shared posts. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I wouldn't. Okay. I kind of figure. I feel like those are the ones where everybody goes looking, like they want to see their kid. They're excited. It's the celebration. It's the same thing that we get when we have events in the school to celebrate whatever it is, whether it's music or whether it's an awards night or whatever it is, these positive events that people are like, yes, I'm here for this, because they want to celebrate their child or their grandchild or their niece or whatever.
So here's a dynamic that I don't think has changed over the course of years, whether it's whatever we're in 2025 or whether we're in 1995 or 1950. The dynamic of parents wanting to feel good about the success of their children remains positive throughout. So us taking opportunity to celebrate people's achievement, I think is extremely important because it helps build a culture of support that pays dividends down the road, whether it's this year, next year, or whenever. So all of those dynamics that you just alluded to, and all of the ways that we can find to celebrate people's success, I think puts us on a positive thinking path and creates a positive attitude about how we move forward as a school and as a community.
And it makes people feel good about what's going on at the school and with their kid. And
Sure.
I think that is very much worth celebrating. I love seeing even when it's just like it's honor roll, which I mean, kind of feels basic or old school. You'll see people like sharing and celebrating and, excited that their kid accomplished what they accomplished. So just wanted to call that out because I think it drives engagement on social media, but it's just so darn good for our culture overall. So I don't have any other questions, but thank you again, Anthony. You did a great job and really glad to have you as part of the team.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. It means a lot.
Yeah. Okay, next, I want to talk a little bit about the property tax and rent rebate program. We touched briefly on it during the budget presentation. We've had conversations occasionally internally that a lot of people don't know that we have that program. A lot of people, I mean, it's new, so I understand that, but this is not just a problem in our district. I know that other districts also sometimes have a lot lower engagement than they would like. With our rebate being as good as it is it 70% or 75%? I think it's 75. It's so worth people doing. Anybody could use that extra few $100 or up to like $750. So I wanted to just talk briefly, if we could, about how to get the word out that this exists. And one idea that had been raised is, can we put something about it that directs people to the website, to either that site or somewhere else where they can get information right on the tax bill? Is there room?
That's a good question. I am not sure about that. I would have to bring that back. I don't even think Maureen could answer that. I think she probably have to go to the other, like we work with someone from the borough to get all that stuff done. So there's a few people involved, but
Okay, could we pursue it?
sure, we
To
can
at
always ask
least,
a question. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And if that isn't an option, then I would kind of like to talk about what else we can do. Certainly, I know the state reps offices know about it and push it now. But not everybody gets their rebate done there. Some people do it directly online themselves. Some people may have their tax preparer do it. This is a little bit more like there are tax preparation groups that are like volunteer organizations that do taxes for free, especially for seniors or for low income folks. That would be a good place for us to be like, hey, we really want you to know we do this, to try to get people to take advantage of that savings. So that's kind of I will follow up with that with the one organization I know, but if we have any connections on the school district end, I'd ask that we check into that as well, if there's any ideas.
No problem. We will discuss that. We will make sure that we get you an answer. It might not be immediate, but we'll get it as soon as we can.
Okay. Are there any other ideas about how we get the word out? Hearing none, I will move on. Okay.
So sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was slow to the button. Sorry.
That's okay.
So there's still all of the other what some people would call old-fashioned methods, including churches and including the senior center and places like that, where either A, you have information available, or B, you actually take part in some type of an event that they have already set up and are sponsoring, and you have an information table there. All of those types of methods, I think, are still also available.
Agreed. I
Because-
know that's, yeah,
Yeah, because some of that audience that we want to get is not an audience that is going to be naturally going to find out about the school district in some way or another.
very much, right. I know Joe Cerisi works on the property tax and rent rebate stuff at the senior center. I think part of the trouble is that there's a lag. Our program runs July through June. The state property tax and rent rebate program runs late January through December typically. They say they run through June and then they always extend it to December through December. So there ends up being this, like, you might get, if you do it early in the year, you're not gonna be able to come to Pottstown and get it done in Pottstown right away. So there you have to remember then several months later to go do this thing. I don't think there's really a solution to that as long as it's tied to our budget process. But I do think that's part of the problem. Mrs. Bearden.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Amato, for mentioning that. I had mentioned some time ago that we could target the senior center as well as have the Family Advisory Committee leads help in some way with targeting at conferences and different events at schools. We also could look at the Ricketts Community Center. I don't know what name it's going by, if it's actually the Olivet Boys and Girls now, but for me, it will always be Ricketts Community Center because that's the point of it being named such. And then also churches and different organizations with Aclamo and other areas where we wouldn't have the bilingual aspects that we, would help some of the homeowners. But I think we should be strategically not just, throwing it out there, because whatever dragnet we get from throwing it out there, that's great. But if it doesn't yield us what we're looking for, right, maybe we could target specific areas where we host drives. Perhaps each of the areas of the town have a church or an organization, like the local Elks or the local, we don't have the Moose, but the local FOE or, any of our supportive organization structures that would host something where our leads could provide some more information that they're not getting in the mainstream as mentioned. Perhaps they're not listening. They don't have children in the schools anymore, that sort of thing. But I know any of those areas that are hosting are certainly our fire halls, and chief and supportive people there and personnel could host. And that would also help possibly to drive some income and some donations into those organizations. So it would be a helpful tie-in that if we're, providing this sort of direct information on how they can file and receive these rebates, they're also meeting, our local fire and rescue personnel, and perhaps would be then willing to donate to those organizations or get involved and, not even know that those organizations provide whatever services that they provide. So maybe if we can target some of the most trafficked areas, that might help too.
Yeah. Good stuff. Cool. Well, there's a few ideas there too, and also throughout, the rebate is targeted toward low-income seniors and disabled folks. And I realize seniors and social media don't always go together, but there's a decent amount of seniors on social media. It also is worth doing something there that can be shared. If we didn't, I don't remember if we did that last year. If we had a social media post about it, like driving people to it.
I feel like we
Regardless-
had a big
Yeah.
announcement after it happened.
Okay.
I mean, we can We can
Yeah,
always,
it's just a
always do it
thought.
again. Yeah.
When we get to that point, especially once we finalize our budget this year, and assuming it's an ongoing program, and frankly, even now, we could do something on that level too. That's fairly easy to say. Hey, reminder, like this is an option. Here's where you find it. Link it up. So anyway, I just wanted to spend a little time exploring that because seeing the very low numbers of participation so far makes me think people don't know, which is also natural with it being a new program. Advocacy. Two things there. I don't want to cover territory we already covered because Maureen went over the governor's budget very well. The big picture was potentially there's more tax equity and adequacy, or what we would call fair funding, in that budget for us if it comes through. It's always a mystery about it if it will come through. All of the other line items of the budget were very, I'm just going to say mediocre. They were underwhelming, especially given just even keeping up with inflation. They generally didn't or barely did. One notable thing there is cyber charter reform. The governor proposed a flat tuition rate of $8,000 per student per year for regular ed. But also took away kind of the cyber charter fund that they had put in place last year to help offset some of the overcharges, we'll call that. So he took out the old thing, suggested a new thing. If it went through, it would be a lot of savings. I don't think it's still, I mean, we still have so much, we're so behind looking at those numbers tonight. Oh, Mr. Rodriguez, jump right in if you got something to say.
Yeah, I actually have something to ask because I don't know the answer to this. I heard 8,000 straight out of the gate and do think that is a very good idea. Did what was the special ed angle? Is that just to be
So
left alone?
he proposed nothing for special ed. Like, you know how we want tiers? Like, we're like, hey, why isn't this based on costs, or at least tiers of cost, rather than this weird, very distorted way that we have to pay for special ed tuition now? He didn't make any suggestions on that front.
Then I would humbly suggest that would be an area that we would need to focus on, because call me a shady businessman, but if you tell me that's all I'm getting, then every single kid I get is going to need some.
We already have I mean, yeah, I probably shouldn't make too definitive of a statement in a public meeting, but based on my anecdotal experience, this is a very real problem. And while I do appreciate a capped tuition rate across the state, I know why that's being suggested. When I look at the way we do special education tuition for charters, especially cyber charters, to me, that's the bigger scam. I mean, that feels like a total racket to me. And last year, and I couldn't describe it in great detail what went through, but last year there was money set aside to offset schools' costs as it related to charter and cyber charter, and maybe it was only cyber charter tuition and special ed tuition. We're pulling that back, and now we're suggesting 8,000 per student. Maybe it's a wash, but that's if it goes through, which feels like kind of it's been a slog. Well, not even a slog. It's been a fail every time we've tried to do that so far. With the exception of, we had a win last year with getting the number of students that you base your calculations on in your district are now based on, and Maureen, I hope you'll jump in and tell me if I'm wrong and this never went through, but I'm 99% sure it did. The number is based on the actual number of special ed students in our district, so that we can at least do that part of the calculation right. Whereas it used to be a distorted low number, which drove our per student amount even higher. Again, total racket. So we made a little progress last year that is going to stick, but some of the rest, it's like we're exchanging last year's progress for this year's proposed progress. And I'm just not at all sure about that. I think that that is an area where we can focus in on advocacy, especially after seeing this year's budget, first look budget, and the fact that our cyber charter costs have just continued to go up and up. I don't know what it should look like, but I think that for us, that is an area, and no doubt for many other districts across the state, that cyber charter reform is an area where the state can increase the amount of funding available to us without having to pony it all up themselves. And I would think they'd want to take that win where they can help us close the gap there in a way that is not just coming out of the state coffers. My 2 cents. Any other thoughts from anyone on advocacy, budget, cyber charter reform? Okay. Is FAC present in the waiting room that they would want to give an update? I'm afraid they gave up on us with this very long meeting and left.
Not at this time, Mrs. Johnson.
Okay. I know that they have an event coming up. And if I was on my game, I'd know which day that was. Mr. Rodriguez, do you remember the date of the
Yes,
Jam?
it's 2 weeks from Saturday. So not this Saturday, but next Saturday. And that is the 20 something, but
Hold on, I will find it. You just sent out the update. And I want to make sure to note it.
29, I think. No. I know it's Saturday. It's 2 weeks from, so no, that would be the
22nd?
22. I went 1 week to
Okay, yeah. So 22nd, and why don't I go ahead and share my screen real quick once this downloads. There we go. Okay, because I know that they have spent time putting that together, and it got canceled once because of weather, I believe. So certainly anybody who can attend that looks like it'll be a whole lot of fun. I know for a lot of the kids at school, pajama day is like the absolute favorite. So I would imagine this would be a little bit of an extension of that. So other than that, I think we're all set. Unless there's anything else that you have, Mr. Rodriguez or Mr. Amato. And our next meeting is March 13th. And this was a very full meeting night. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. And that's it. Oh, Mrs. Bearden.
I'd just like to apologize to the public as they may be experiencing some of the outages due to the wind and so forth. So was our board. They've noticed some have popped in, popped out, and that is really related to the power outages, either in their home or in their company or somewhere with their children having to get to them. So thank you for bearing with us, and for the chairs for the disruption. And I wasn't feeling the greatest, but I did want to show my face, and that wasn't even good to do because I didn't want to pop in and pop out and cause disruption for the chairs. So thank you very much for bearing with the board as they're experiencing those outages.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Yes, I know it was a couple people tonight who had problems. Okay, have a great night, everyone.